Week 14 is done. The fantasy playoffs are upon us, and Drico and I are above the expected advance rate with our FFPC best ball teams. Prepare for an hour of gloating and more on Stat Chasing.
Pat Fryer Helmo.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita hand job.
Fix your sight.
Jamar. Alpha play chase.
Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally at this point. You're right.
We did it, Drico. We advanced well above the expected advance rate on FFPC all season. They told us advance rate is actually all that matters, and you guys suck because you're not advancing more than your expected teams. Well, look who's laughing now.
We have 3.8% above the expected advance rate.
Let's go, baby. I mean, it was dire. There were
some down moments. There were some bleak feelings.
Yes.
Many weeks I didn't even check my teams.
I mean, how could anyone have foreseen, though, that a strategy that's predicated on anti-fragility and the chaos of the NFL season taking place would perform better after we have time for some chaos to take place? It's simply unprecedented. No one could have seen anything like this coming.
The way you say that, it is actually kind of poetic how this season kind of turned out. Where, like, more so than in recent years, the early running backs were just, like, untouchable in the early weeks of the season. And then towards the end, all of that fragility, all of those kind of zero RB candidates break out. The receivers start putting up points. It is kind of it's poetic in just like how scheduled it was.
Yeah, and I mean, I still feel like in the range of outcomes for how good or bad a specific season run out is for zero RB, this was still a pretty bad one for zero RB, right? Like, you have lots of we were talking about this yesterday when we were looking at the teams that advanced for us, but so many what would be absurdly good teams are like, oh, this one had Brandon Ayuk and Rashee Rice and Stephon Diggs. So I guess it was just, DOA. And so you get so many of these wide receiver injuries. Like every week that I do the charts for Stat Chasing, I have a line in the code that is the list of players to exclude for season-ending injury. And I mean, the list of wide receivers has always been like 5 times longer than the list of running backs this season. And that's like when we had the most running backs that I was excluding, wide receivers were still far more numerous. So it was just a little bit of a weird season for that. But I mean, zero RB isn't even wholly predicated on injury, right? It's also that you have some of these running backs who might not have a job to start the season or might not be the primary back to start the season. But as NFL teams find out more about who this player actually is and how they actually fit into their team through the process of discovery over the course of an NFL season, the talent shines through. And I feel like that's really a better framing of zero RB, that we want to bet on the things that we think are most likely to be true from a talent perspective and let the chips fall where they may. And that's I think that's better than saying like, oh, it's just a strategy where you prey on the injuries of players and you're just rooting for all these bad things to happen. It's like, that's really not it. There's a much rosier framing to it where you're rooting for these plucky underdogs who have gone undiscovered.
Chuba Hubbard is like a good example.
Yeah.
Of somebody who was just very, very good. And like, yes, injuries happen to have like benefited some, but he was still like the bell cow.
Yeah, Chase Brown's another really good example where like this guy had a workhorse profile in college. We all really liked him last year. Nothing happens, right? This year, even to start the season, it doesn't look great for him because they just refuse to stop using Zach Moss, right? Every time Chase Brown touches the ball, it's like, wow, look at that guy compared to the guy they're normally trying out here. And in Chase Brown's situation, it did take an injury for him to become the true bell cow, and consolidate.
But he was ending up as a good pick, even without the injury.
Even prior to the injury, he was going to be one of those like 0 RB hits where it's like he can deliver a spike week here and there. The floor might not be fantastic, but
he was getting touches.
Yeah, but ultimately, things ended a lot better than I think either of us would have.
Bucky Irving, there's another one.
Yeah, Bucky Irving, another great one. Tyrone Tracy. Tyrone Tracy is one where I would have had a pretty hard time seeing it coming in the way that it did for him. I've got to think that Devin Singletary, his injury stuff that he had earlier, I have to think that's just lingering because he's been one of your favorites for years because I believe you've described it as creeping ivy. This guy just like takes over a whole backfield and strangles out the other backs because coaches love him so much.
It's so funny.
It's
always been so funny,
right? Like from a raw athlete standpoint, or how funny he is for fantasy, like those are not the things that Devin Singletary is. But you know what Devin Singletary actually is? Fantastic football player. Great real life, doesn't make mistakes, can do all the stuff. So in real life football, coaches love him, and that translates to him just having a stranglehold on the role. So I would have thought it was really difficult if you told me like Devin Singletary will be healthy and active in week 14 and Tyrone Tracy is going to get the vast majority of the work. I'd say that seems pretty far-fetched to me. But here we are. And that's, again, that kind of like is 0 RB in a nutshell. We don't really know anything, so why don't we just bet on the people that we have evidence of them being talented, right? Like, that's really all that it comes down to. So I feel like that's enough of a preamble.
Yeah. That's a pretty good preamble. So we've got our quarterback volume, efficiency, and rushing chart here. Before we get into some of these numbers, I remember you kind of harping on, or harping on is like the wrong way to put it, is emphasizing the big five at quarterback. And I know in kind of private conversation that you've suggested that your thinking might have changed. And you've probably touched on this in previous podcasts on other shows. But do you want to talk about how your thinking may have evolved there?
Yeah, so the thing about playoff best ball that you have to remember, I had this same conversation. So we're going to start with a broad topic conversation about playoff best ball, and then we're going to drill down into the quarterback question. My favorite kind of answer is a really lengthy one that requires an explanation before I give it. So I had someone who very early in the playoff best ball cycle, I said something to the effect of taking Saquon 101 is kind of suicide. Like, you really don't want to do it. It sets you up to fail. You get boxed out. This is back when the big five quarterbacks were really, really strong concept. I thought was very important. The Eagles had worse playoff odds, lower bye odds. This is a few games ago, so they weren't looking quite as strong. Their power rankings were lower. All of these factors making Saquon a worse 101 pick than he is right now. And so at the time, I said something to the effect of, you don't want to take Saquon 101. I think that's a mistake. You really want to wait till like at least the third pick, because then you can get some stuff coming back to you that makes that work. And the person that I was talking to just mentioned that today and said, oh, look at this now. Leg Up has Saquon back to 101. Like, and it's like, yeah, because the whole landscape for playoff best ball changes with every NFL game that gets played. Every week, we're basically resetting the meta on playoff best ball because all of these probabilities change. And playoff best ball is so much a probability-driven and math-driven game, and so much less about the actual NFL players. Like the individual players and what they will score in a given week means that least in playoff best ball compared to any other format. And the thing that means the most is this team going to be alive in that specific round of the playoffs? And so because you have this dynamic of these shifting probabilities with every single week, and really as we get closer and closer to the end of the season, you get the shifting of the seeding, the actual playoff seeds, and who is going to face each other in round 2 and round 3. That's quite important because you want to ideally keep as much of your team alive as long as possible. So you don't want them to play each other in round 1 or round 2. You'd prefer for teams from the same conference to only be able to meet in the conference championship, or at least meet the majority of the time that they find each other in the conference championship. So there's all of these underlying factors that will shift the meta and shift the value of players, mostly based on the team that they're on and what happened to their team and their team's playoff standing in the prior week. And so now getting into the quarterback conversation, previously the top 5 quarterbacks, and that would be Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and Jared Goff, made up such a high percentage of the Super Bowl outcomes. The total number of Super Bowl matchups that were possible, those 5 quarterbacks were in such a large majority of them that it really, really made sense to emphasize those players, because without one of those quarterbacks, you were effectively forced into playing for a much lower probability Super Bowl. And that's really the long and short of it, why the Big 5 was such a thing. Now, it's actually a lot different. We're looking at a smaller gap between the 4th and 5th quarterbacks and their probability of going to the Super Bowl, and the 6th and 7th and even 8th quarterbacks. So, for example, and I guess this would be a decent. You can pull up the playoff odds chart here, just because I'm going to reference some stuff in it. It'll probably be visual. Then counting numbers.
Give me 1 second.
Yeah, we're pulling an audible here. We're deviating from the quarterback chart first.
So present share screen. There's a beautiful. We're taking away the colorful chart. And we're putting in this beautiful, beautiful table.
Yes, multiple 2 shades of blue and a shade of gray, which will surely be on the screen shortly here.
I clicked share, but then I didn't. I never clicked add to the screen.
So this table is over on Legendary Upside. Any tier leg up subscriber can see it, so you don't have to be a Sidekick subscriber to see it. These probabilities are baked into the Sidekick. It's helping to power the decision.
Pat is going to get this video demonetized on YouTube.
Yeah, we're giving away the milk for free here. But the thing that is really important is go ahead and sort that conference championships. Okay, it looks like you have it sorted.
Yeah. That's how I was looking at it myself while you were talking.
So this 4th column here from the left, this conf champ probability, that shows the probability in our simulations that any of these teams actually makes it to the conference championship. And so previously you had the top 5 occupying so much of that probability. But now if you look beyond the first 4, where the big 4 are Detroit, Buffalo, KC, and Philadelphia, after that, there's kind of a log jam here where you get Pittsburgh.
It's just a long tail.
Yeah, they're all the same, basically. They're virtually identical, Pittsburgh, Green Bay, and Baltimore. It's anyone's game to make it to the conference championship out of those 3 teams. So what you're actually seeing in the meta of playoff best ball right now is a gross mispricing of Baltimore. It is egregious. If you click Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry at the 1-2 turn, it's one of the worst things you can possibly do. It's not very different than clicking Jordan Love and Josh Jacobs at the 1-2 turn, or Russell Wilson and Najee Harris at the 1-2 turn. Now, it's
so can I just interrupt?
Yes.
Slightly. So one thing when you look at our charts, we show that Lamar is the fantasy god this year. He's super efficient in passing. He's got the rushing. His passing volume. So not only is he rushing, he also has a high expected point from passing. And so he will have, I think, the highest projection of any quarterback week to week. I guess the Josh Allen just put up the highest amount of any quarterback, but he's also had some pretty low scoring games as well. But I guess I think I know the answer to this, which is I think people are pricing in that high projection and they're probably overrating the ELO, the team strength a little bit, and then putting a lot of weight on that high projection. But I think you touched on this last week, where it doesn't matter. It almost doesn't matter how high the projection is if he doesn't advance. If he's not in the conference championship, his projected points is 0.
He projects for 0 in the conference championship. And yeah, to the point about the ELO, the relative strength of the team, the Packers are basically neck and neck with the Ravens. They have the same relative strength. They're the 4th and 5th strongest teams in the league. And then the Steelers are right on their tail. The Steelers are right behind the Ravens. So it's congruous. This logjam of these probabilities isn't just because of their records and kind of how their lot has fallen based on the way the season's played out and where their seeding is going to be. It's also because these teams are similar in their strength. And yes, Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are both the 2 premium scorers at their position compared to the other players in this same tier of conference championship probability. But that's all that it should be. It should be a tiebreaker within the tier. And so of the Steelers, Packers, and Ravens, yes, Lamar Jackson should be the first quarterback. Derrick Henry should be the first quarterback. But you know what teams are better than those? The Eagles, the Bills, and the Lions. And I don't care that James Cook scores fewer fantasy points than Derrick Henry, in a median projection. I don't care that, David Montgomery scores fewer fantasy points than Derrick Henry in a median projection. Those guys make the Super Bowl and make the conference championship so much more often. And you might look at it and say, oh, well, 30% to 46%, that's not that big a difference. I mean, it's an enormous difference. Like when you're thinking of it in a relative sense, like the jump from 30% to 45% is a 50% increase. Like it's enormous. And so in terms
of expected value, it's a big difference.
Correct. And that's why I'm using the relative increase there, because that's more along the lines of like how you would be getting at an expected value calculation is looking at relative change in the conference championship probabilities. And so to put a bow on it and go all the way back to your initial question of has my opinion on the big 5 quarterbacks changed? The answer is yes. And so there's 2 ways. I think that you could have 2 very strong debates for how to play this now. And it's that there's a big 4, and it's that it's Detroit, Buffalo, KC, and Philly, and those big 4 quarterbacks are super important. Or it's that there are 7 viable quarterbacks, right? I mean, even I think Minnesota, you even could say.
I was actually about to bring them up. They look insane.
Yeah, they do. Did you see the stat that of the NFC North teams, the top 3, not including the Bears, they've only lost to each other?
That's
or it might be I think they've only lost 3 games not to each other.
But let's put it another way. So based on ELO, based on a projection of team strength, the Ravens are 29% to go to the conference championship. And you have to take their quarterback and running back in the 1-2 turn. The Vikings are 23%. So like, what's that? 90% of their probability, something like that. 80%. So like much very very close. And then Sam Darnold, obviously he has his bad games, but he just put up 40 points.
Yeah.
And so the projection for Sam Darnold is actually very, very good. And you can very, very easily get the entire team stack. I haven't done many of these drafts or any of these drafts, so I'm just a pundit, I guess. But I imagine that you can basically take a full-on Viking stack, uncontested, and then if the Vikings make the Super Bowl, you win.
Yes. And it would be, and people, this is the other thing that I think is really, really fascinating because being the guy who has like made his whole thing playoff best ball, lots of people talk to me about playoff best ball every day. So I'm getting to hear from other people and hear their opinions on this and hear where they think that we might be wrong in our projections for these probabilities of these certain events or which teams they like and all of this stuff. And one thing that's common among almost everyone that I talk to, and a lot of these people are people that I think are extremely sharp. They might be really good basketball players. They might be really, really good DFS players, like people absolutely crushing DFS, like guys that I would say are much smarter than myself. But everyone that I talk to has the same glitch in their brain. And it's a bug that I have talked about before, but it's that the human brain has this weird way of seeing a low probability outcome and saying, oh, that actually happens 0% of the time. Yeah, Seattle making the conference championship. Yeah, I see that you guys have that happening 17% of the time. It actually happens 0% of the time. And it's not like you're sitting there and thinking through this and maniacally plotting about how like it's wrong. It's just a natural thing that your brain is doing this to skip over.
I trust the projections here. I had the same reaction of like, that looks like a bug. Yeah. But I mean, the mat is the mat.
Yeah, and I promise I've stepped through each of these sims to make sure that hey, let me make sure that all the seating's correct. Let me make sure all the tiebreaker logic is correct. All of this stuff.
So who are Seattle likely? Are they what seed are they projected for?
They would be the 4 seed because they get there from winning their division.
Okay, so they're the 4 seed, and who do you think who's the likely 5 seed?
The likely 5 seed would probably be Minnesota then.
I guess that's the other way we can look at these. So who's the most likely to play Seattle in the that's in the conference championship. So never mind.
Never mind. We don't have just because the way that all of these odds work is everything flows through to the conference championship. So rather than if we included more, I mean, this table is already a lot, so if we included more info on it, like, and here's the 1 seed probability, here's the 2 seed probability, right, and all this stuff.
The only thing but we think their likely opponent is the Vikings because
that's one
the Packers
of the
will
outcomes.
win
It could also be the Packers.
It's the Packers or the Vikings. Those are the 2 likely opponents.
Yeah.
And like, why can't they beat either of those teams?
Yeah, no, they certainly can. One that's a really interesting one that made Pat be like, I need you to double check the sims. Like, this seems really wrong. Is the Commanders, their probability of facing the Lions when the Commanders make the conference championship is quite high. I want to say that they're the 13% or 17%. Scroll up to the top so I can.
So that's Green Bay. It's 29.
The first one. Okay, so they're 20%. 20%. So that means when Washington makes the conference championship, 20% of the time they face Detroit. Which you might be thinking in your head, how does that work out? Detroit's the 1 seed. Washington's very likely the 7 seed. How do they see them 20% of the time in the conference championship? They meet way before that. And the way that it happens is Detroit is the 1 seed 73% of the time, not 100% of the time, right? And Washington is the 7 seed less than 100% of the time, right? And also, you have upsets that happen, right? Like, upsets can happen. And so when Washington makes it as the 6 seed, say, or, I don't even know if they can make it as the 5 seed. There's probably some very low probability outcome they can make it as the 5 seed. But you get Washington as the 6 seed or something. Now all of a sudden you get a 7 seed upset. Detroit faces the 7 seed. Washington goes on to the next round. They win in round 2, and all of a sudden Detroit and Washington are playing each other there, right? Or Detroit doesn't get the 1 seed. Washington does get the 7. Washington upsets twice and meets Detroit in the conference championship. So you get these low probability events that there are multiple different paths for this thing to happen, and they all sum up to this number that seems way too large for our puny human brains. But that is why we use simulations, because we can account for lots and lots and lots of different futures, and we can sum up all of those outcomes and then get the actual probability as long as we have good inputs here. So,
and I guess the other thing about this is, so these are sims of using the current data, and I have to imagine if and when the Commanders get locked in as a 7 seed, the Lions get locked in as a 1 seed, this goes to 0. So, like, this is true right now in this window in time. And I mean, who knows, if they become the 6th seed, then that probability goes up, and or whatever, how it goes. But it is important to know that it's very dynamic. That, like, just because we're saying that this week on this particular podcast doesn't mean that somebody listening on Wednesday should still be doing this time next week.
Yeah, absolutely. By this time next week, everything's going to have changed. And that's one of the things I like the best about playoff basketball. The meta changes on an instant. And it's another reason why I think philosophically you really should spread out your entries for playoff basketball, because you really have no way of being able to identify what you think is a unique combo and won't be attainable later, or what you think is the huge edge that you have to draft all 150 of your teams right now before that edge goes away. So much can change, and it's so chaotic that I really, really think that you want to spread out your entries. And really, I would say the best argument for spreading out your entries is that there are outcomes where the guys that are the round 1 advance rate monsters are coming from the Bucks, or they're coming from the Seahawks, or they come from the Rams, or, oh my gosh, the Bengals with their 1.3% playoff probability somehow made it, and it comes from the Bengals, right? So you get these things that are very hard to predict on teams that are very unlikely to go far in the playoffs. But later in the draft cycle, when you know what the seeding is and you know which teams are locked into the playoffs, you can tell yourself, I could see a chance where the Rams upset whoever it is they play in round 1. So I'll throw Puka and Kyron in as, round 1 advance rate pieces. And if they can steal a game, then great. I've got a really strong team heading into round 2. And so just delaying some of your entries for as we get more information about the brackets and the seeding, I think is really sharp. Otherwise, you're just not going to draft any of these really fringe teams that could be the skeleton key to help you advancing some of these really powerful bye week teams. And that's something that I think is a pretty important concept that a lot of people overlook.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. And bringing it back to, I'm going to bring it back to.
Yeah, let's go back to quarterbacks here.
Our charts, and that takes a couple of clicks here while I do that. But I mean the two things that stand out to me the most are, so number 2 and 3 in our adjusted yards per attempt. If you're only looking at the high probability playoff quarterbacks, is Russell Wilson and Sam Darnold, and those guys are pretty much free for quarterbacks. They have reasonable conference championship odds. They have really high efficiency. I feel better about Sam Darnold for sure. Because he's an over a larger sample. My lizard brain makes it easier for me to believe that he can do that with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and Hawkinson, and Aaron Jones. But that's kind of what, when I look at my tables here of our chart, that's what stands out to me strongly.
Yeah, I mean, Darnold is in a really favorable place on the chart too, right? He's got high expected fantasy points from passing,
right,
doing it efficiently. He's got a little bit of rushing in him. He's very like statuesque in the pocket, like he stands in there for a long time, has a long time to throw, but that's what's helping him drive the ball downfield too. And so you get these big spike weeks from him and these big explosion plays. And so, yeah, Darnold is one that I think is really, really interesting. I think that if you're wanting to play particularly aggressively in playoff best ball, you certainly could be willing to fade the quote unquote big five quarterbacks, and not like intentionally fade them, but just say, hey, I'm willing to try and push these quarterbacks and take some really high value skill position players in the hopes that one of the big quarterbacks falls to me. And if they don't, I feel pretty good about then just slamming Vikings for the rest of the, first 2 rounds. I just grabbed 2 of the best skill position players with really high Super Bowl probability. And if I don't get a quarterback that pairs nicely with them, then I pivot. And in the 3rd round, I take Justin Jefferson. 4th round, I take Aaron Jones. And that's early. You don't have to take Justin Jefferson in the 3rd and Aaron Jones in the 4th. You can usually get those guys in the 4th and 5th, sometimes even the 5th and 6th. And so you can just kind of stake your claim on the Vikings early and just be like, all right, I'm going to take 6 Vikings. And I got 2 incredible picks in the first 2 rounds. I take 6 Vikings. I close it out with 2, random dart throws, maybe a couple Bills dart throws or something, or Chiefs dart throws, because those are high Super Bowl probability teams, and call it a day. So I do like.
They have a 6% probability of winning the Super Bowl, so I'm going to extrapolate that of 12%, and it works. It might works out at 24% of conference championship, but that feels really, really high to be able to easily get the entire team. And they just play every round, and it's a really fun offense. It projects really high. There'll be one of the highest total games in the playoffs every week. That screams inefficiency.
Yeah, it definitely is. The Vikings are definitely one of the teams I really like to attack. I want to talk about we talked about some teams that were priced very favorably last time. I want to talk about how, as we get closer and closer to the end of the season, we begin to get clarity on some of these really, really gross teams where the Vikings we're talking about, they could actually win the Super Bowl, or not win the Super Bowl, get to the Super Bowl, right?
Right. No, they could. They have a 6%.
They could win the Super Bowl.
6% is 1 in 20.
I mean, think back to the year where it was Rams.
I would kill for those BBT odds.
Yeah,
6%. Right. I win the BBT. It's insane.
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah. But, I mean, think back to the year that was Rams and Bengals, right? No one would have seen that coming. Those teams make the Super Bowl. Rams end up winning it. So, yes, I'm with you on the Vikings. The ones I want to kind of pivot to here are, I want to talk about the grosser guys that we think are oh, boy, sure, maybe technically they could make the Super Bowl, but, more in a theoretical sense, So, the ones that I think are pretty interesting now are Baker Mayfield and Bo Nix. And so Baker, similar area of the chart as Sam Darnold. You can see him here. They're both right about 16 expected fantasy points from passing. Baker is a little bit more dink and dunk than Sam Darnold, in that a big reason for that is his time to throw is very, very quick. Baker is getting the ball out fast, and Darnold is not. He's kind of the polar opposite, where he's standing in and just trying to chuck it downfield. So that's to explain part of this adjusted yards per attempt, right? But Baker has been nothing short of great this season. I don't think it's a stretch to say Baker Mayfield is one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. If you don't like it, you probably just weren't watching enough Baker Mayfield this year. Because the guy looks great when you watch him, and all of his advanced metrics are pretty great this season. So he's one that I really like, and the Bucs are now high enough probability of getting into the playoffs that I think that they're on the menu for me. I've begun drafting them. They're about 78% to make the playoffs. To me, that's kind of the line. 70% is anything lower than that, I'm not really willing to mess with it. So Seattle is still just barely out for me. They're at 68%, and I'm fine to wait a little bit on that. Because the Rams game Thursday night will actually enlighten us a lot about Seattle's probability, since it's an interdivisional game with Rams 49ers. But Baker is a really interesting one. The other one that is pretty interesting.
Let me ask, I guess the thing with Baker is that his efficiency is fine. It's lower than these other guys. But it's fine. His projection is actually pretty good. It's similar to Sam Darnold, in terms of his volume, his expected points from volume. His rushing is similar. So like you're talking about very similar projected volume with just slightly less efficiency. Just slightly. But then the question that comes to me is, so I know we've kind of mentioned, like, I think Baker Mayfield is probably projects as somebody that even when they're 100%, they become 100% to make the playoffs, and we know who they're playing and all that kind of stuff at the end, they're not getting any more expensive.
Correct.
And so I guess that does lead me to believe that maybe, like you said, on the menu, but a low frequency option. This one is for the sickos.
So what's happening now is you end up in circumstances where this is especially true if you're drafting a lot of bye-heavy teams. If you're drafting a lot of Chiefs, drafting a lot of Lions, you'll run into a situation near the end of drafts where you just simply do not have enough firepower to advance the team out of round one by using teams that have high probabilities of making the conference championship. And so you're forced into these grosser teams where you're playing for, hey, I need the Bucs to make the playoffs. And when they do, it advances this team that has, 5 players live for Lions Chiefs Super Bowl, which is a pretty good Super Bowl to have a piece of, right? And so that's when you typically are going to use teams like the Bucs. The other one I was going to mention is the Broncos. They're both similar probability. Broncos 73%, Bucs 78% to make the playoffs. Now, the nice thing about the Bucs is there's actually a good number of viable fantasy pieces there. You certainly are happy to take Baker as a QB to bridge the gap from week 1 if you got a bye quarterback. You're happy to take both running backs, to be perfectly honest. Like Bucky, if Bucky were fully healthy, it would be so clearly Bucky to me. But we'll get into Bucky and Rachaad White later when we talk about running backs, but I think they're both viable. Obviously, Mike Evans is viable. I don't think you're doing anyone outside of those 3 skill position players, though, on the Bucs. Like, I'm just not going to do a Cade Otton, or I'm not going to do a Jalen McMillan. It just gets to be too thin in this. There's not really a reason to do that. The one knock on Denver is they really only have one skill position player, and that's Courtland Sutton. Like, we'll get into their skill position players a little later when we talk about wide receiver, but that's the one caveat with Denver. So anyway, and then you kind of run into that with the Chargers as well. The Chargers, it's just Ladd McConkey and Justin Herbert. Like, do you really want to draft J.K. Dobbins, who's maybe a week off the IR? And I think we talked about this last week, so we don't need to rehash it. But anyway, those are kind of the vomit quarterbacks that I'm into near the end of drafts. I did have one more quarterback question for you, Drico, before we move on.
Okay.
And that's, if you look at where Patrick Mahomes is on the chart.
Oh, God.
He's passing more. That expected fantasy points from passing is kind of ticked up throughout the season. And he's kind of in the spot on the chart where we talk about guys potentially being positive regression candidates. So, I mean, the story feels a little bit
So what we're saying is he's got volume. He's got volume there, but it's not efficient.
And would it surprise you if the Chiefs, on their way to their 3rd consecutive Super Bowl run,
somehow started playing good,
have Patrick Mahomes start to click, and this guy suddenly he doesn't have to do a lot. What if he's as efficient as Baker Mayfield? What if he's as efficient as Tua? Like, that's all I'm saying. Yeah,
I mean, if we I'm not going to pull it back up, but if we look at your ELO thing, they're 46% to make the conference championship, and just if you make it, like, there's only 3 other quarterbacks that are even in playing, so like you're a top 4 quarterback.
Yeah, seems pretty good.
And then so you've got the volume there, and you just need something to click. You need them to fucking figure out and bring back a robotic knee for Rashee Rice, or like something. You need you need somebody to emerge, but before. So certainly possible.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to running backs. We spent a lot of time here between these first two charts, but we'll get to cruising here. Start talking about some running backs.
Right. We kind of talked the team stuff and the quarterbacks in one.
Yeah.
And now we kind of have the table set on the team stuff. So we've got running back snaps and usage. I almost I hope you're okay with it. I almost don't want to talk about the expected and the fantasy points over expected stuff. Like I almost think that we just want to talk about who's playing for the good teams, and we can mention efficiency and stuff like that.
Yeah. I had just a couple notes here. I mean, this one is pretty quick. We probably should talk about it though. Is Chuba Hubbard? This is you want like 99th percentile season outcomes for a player. This is what it looks like for Chuba Hubbard. Like, not only does the guy play fantastic, which full credit to him for playing so well for the whole season, right? But he also gets the second round rookie running back who, by all accounts was a fantastic prospect. Guy looked great in college. The only stain on his resume is the fact that he tore his ACL late last year. So he's going to be, slowly worked back. And Chuba not only plays incredible, but then has his biggest competition get such a slow start to the season to where he's not even taking snaps really until like week 13. And then the guy goes down with non-contact ACL injury to the same knee in week 14. I mean,
and Miles Sanders is on IR.
Yeah.
And Bryce Young is playing well. Like, that's the big thing of, like, people were really worried about that offense in general. And now it's very functional.
Yeah.
So
Chuba,
I've got two Chuba teams in the fantasy playoffs and super pumped about those.
Yeah. The Chuba is one that you have to be really happy to see on your teams right now. Don't think we need to do any more detailed analysis on it. He's going to be the workhorse he's been the whole season. Like, congratulations. You're super happy if you see him. The other ones that I wanted to talk about with respect to this chart, just because it's helpful to be able to see their workload, it's the revenge of the slappy Drico. We talked about how we had this late season surge to make our best ball advance rates actually be above expectation on FFPC. But all the slappy 0 RB running backs got there, and they've gotten there bigly. Chase Brown, I mean, you want to talk bell cow, like, is there a bigger bell cow in the NFL than Chase Brown right now? Like, I actually don't think there is.
Well, our chart shows that there is.
I mean, a lot of those guys are not getting useful touches, though, right? Compared to, like, a lot of it is run block or pass block over Chase Brown. But yes, like,
well, so his targets per run is probably a lot higher than those guys.
Right. Yeah.
Is what you're saying. So let me look up expected points per game. I'm just gonna do. No, that's not that one.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want to jump ahead to the expected points per game chart, we should be able to see it over the last 4 weeks for Chase Brown.
Well, that doesn't have. So Chase Brown over the last 5 weeks, he actually does top the league in expected points.
Yeah,
so and he's got 22.2 expected points a game, 11 from rushing, 11 from receiving.
Oh my God!
So that's the double legendary season.
That's folks. A legendary. Yeah, Chase Brown is literally. He might finish the season with a legendary running back profile. Obviously, didn't do it for the entire season, but like
right. His end of year stretch might fit that.
Man, I mean, that's there. Like, if you asked me if I would rather have Chase Brown or Saquon Barkley on my fantasy teams in the fantasy playoffs, because Saquon Barkley is like 50% owned, I think the answer is Chase Brown. If they were equal ownership, I do think the answer is Saquon Barkley. I'm not that big of a Saquon denier, but I mean, like 11 the double on expected fantasy points is elite. Like just for reference, what's Saquon
for a mid-round running back?
Yeah, what's Saquon Barkley's expected fantasy points per game over? We can just do the last 5, so you got a similar.
Give me 1 second while I pull it back up. So, so I'm doing expected points per game. I'm sorting it by expected points per game. I gotta take out, for some reason it brings the error terms to the front when I sort it. And so Saquon is at 16.5.
So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's crazy to say that you would prefer to see a Chase Brown team in your portfolio than a Saquon Barkley team.
The difference is that Saquon has 7.7 expected points at over expected per game.
Yeah, he is quite efficient.
Chase Brown is like negative 0.4.
Yeah.
All that means is that Chase Brown is actually like a positive regression candidate, and Saquon is a negative regression candidate.
True. I mean, yeah. Normally,
that's obviously joking. Like
it is a little bit of a joke, but I do think like when you watch them both play, you understand why Saquon is so high over expectation. It's because the guy is absurdly efficient. He's breaking long plays. He's scoring touchdowns from far out.
When he gets a gap, he's like straight through it. He's very decisive, and he's been very good in the open field.
He's getting the most of it. But Chase Brown also is pretty explosive, like making a lot of his opportunities. I mean, if you watched the game last night, that little screen pass down the sideline, like he was just gone, like Chase Brown
very fast.
Yeah, he's electric. So it wouldn't shock me at all if he's able to put up some fantasy points over expectation here in the playoffs when we need them the most.
Yeah.
The other guys I had here in the Revenge of the Slappy column, Rico Dowdle. Finally, the Cowboys have, for the most part, stopped messing around with wasting snaps on Ezekiel Elliott. They did do, the stupidest thing of all time, throw Zeke in to give him a carry like inside the 10-yard line, which went absolutely nowhere. And then they pulled him. But it was like, it felt like a pity touch. Like, you're still in the NFL, bud. It was such a Make-A-Wish touch. You know what it actually was? It was a Salvation Army bucket touch. They were like, I mean, what if Zeke could get in the Salvation Army bucket one last time? Like, that's truly what it was. And it was a
what's his name? Rudy touch.
Yeah, it was a Rudy touch for sure. Oh man. And so
Rico Dowdle, he has about 15 expected points per game over the last 3 games. I'm using that because that's when they started using him more.
Yeah. Yeah, he has not been as efficient. Against the Bengals, he looked decent, but
the Bengals made this guy look great.
Yeah.
So over the last 3, he's actually 1.4 expected points over expected. So like, I kind of think, Rico Dowdle is like at expectation efficiency wise all season for a terrible team. So he might actually be good. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he's probably a replacement level back, but
I think he might be just one notch above replacement level.
You said
he's playing like replacement. He's giving replacement level quality play for a garbage team.
Yeah,
which it does make me wonder what you'd get if he actually. This is academic, but what you'd get if he played for a good team.
Imagine if the Cowboys are actually good this year. Rico Dowdle would have been such a smash. I wish I had a time machine to go back and make this version of Drico talk to the version of Drico that was just absolutely stopping me from taking Rico Dowdle.
I didn't stop you. We took like fucking 30% Rico Dowdle.
we did take a lot of Rico Dowdle in your defense. We just would have had like 60% if you had pumped the brakes on me. But you know what? Pumping the brakes on that Rico Dowdle probably got us a lot more Chase Brown, got us a lot more Zach Charbonnet. And Zach Charbonnet is the last of the triumvirate of the revenge of the slappy running backs. I mean, the Kenneth Walker injury, we don't have very much news right now. It's a Tuesday, so we don't have anything really further than what we knew last week. But what if this is a multi-week Kenneth Walker injury here?
That's what it actually sounded like.
That's kind of how I'm reading the tea leaves as well. To me, what I've seen is they're really just trying to like find out what's wrong still, you know? So
he said it was originally an ankle injury, and now it's a calf strain as well. Which is like
I've seen they said the ankle is now no longer the concern, and that it's transitioned to the calf that's the concern. But I mean, that's always a little scary. The calf stuff is pretty scary. It's not as bad as
that's the slow recovering muscle.
Yeah,
like I'm not a medical person, so I shouldn't say this, but I've always been more frustrated with my calf injuries than my.
Yeah, and I mean, I do know that the calf injuries can cause additional concern for Achilles stuff, so they sometimes are like extra careful on stuff like that. Anyway, yeah, if Charbonnet is the bell cow back, which is what makes his contingent upside so strong, is his profile is that he's a do everything. He is a 3-down, very capable workhorse. He lacks some of the, je ne sais quoi that Kenneth Walker brings, but he can do some stuff better than Kenneth Walker. And, he's certainly a very competent 3-down back. And he
had 29 expected points in week 14.
Yeah. I mean, it was,
so like he had efficiency, but 29 expected points. Like, that's insane.
Yeah, before I did my diversification stuff for my DFS portfolio this weekend, I think I had something like 87% Kenneth or Zach Charbonnet.
Zach Charbonnet, and I wish you kept it.
I diversified it down to like a little below 60%. But that's like, I put a pretty high premium on mitigating risk in my DFS portfolio, and it still was like, yeah, dude, slam the fuck out of Zach Charbonnet. Yeah, he's a great play. So yeah, those slappy running backs, I think, are definitely live to potentially be defining pieces in the playoffs. Pretty exciting. I think we can move on. Or you said you really don't want to spend a ton of time on RB efficiency. I just have a couple notes on
just to mention it when it comes up. I want to talk about, because the reason I want to focus on this chart is because I kind of want to talk about guys who are useful for the playoff stuff, like who are the volume guys that are cheap in the playoff basketball, and I think you brought up Najee as an example. Like, yeah, I mean, look, I know it's Derrick Henry. I know Derrick Henry is like generational, and that like comparing their snap rate with Najee is like stupid. It's very, very stupid. But at the same time, there's an entire draft between Derrick Henry and Najee Harris in ADP, and these guys are very similar snap rate, very similar playoff probability, and it does kind of, I think, accentuate that point about don't take Derrick Henry at the 1-2 turn.
Yeah, the one thing, just to like help people properly frame it in their heads, is that when you're ranking players for playoff best ball, the tier is based on their playoff probability. It has nothing to do with the player's skill or ability to score fantasy.
So they're the same tier.
Yeah, and then inside the tier, you're going to break ties towards the players who score more fantasy points. So Najee Harris and Derrick Henry, for playoff best ball purposes, are the same tier. But like you said, Derrick Henry goes much, much earlier. The one thing that's a little like I've gotten a lot of Najee, been hammering Steelers lately just because the market refuses to correct their price. The one thing that I'm wanting to keep my eye on here is if Jaylen Warren starts to creep in a little bit more. Like he hasn't been like edging Najee out, but he has been on the field. And like this last week, I don't know if you got to watch the Steelers game, but they took Najee off the field in a couple situations where it wasn't like, oh, now it's long down and distance, so let's get Warren out here. It was like 3rd and short inside the 10. It's like, this is Jaylen Warren time. And so it's not what you would, if you just ask someone who's not like in the weeds on it, they're like, hey, the Steelers are on the field. It's 3rd and short inside the 10. Who's the running back? Your average person is just going to say, oh, Najee. The Steelers don't think that. The Steelers think that it's Warren. Right. And
right. I think you're looking at a 60-40 split between Najee and Jaylen Warren, which means that Jaylen Warren is kind of in the same tier as Derrick Henry as well. If you're being fully maybe just a tier below him, but
yeah, I'd say maybe slightly below. But yeah, they're much closer than people would believe.
And then it also kind of speaks to Justice Hill being
a great pick.
Given he has a pretty I'm going to go to the next chart. Where is he?
Yeah, right. He's a pretty Correndo.
He's a pretty good snap rate as well.
Yeah, right with Jaylen Warren too. So yeah, the Justice Hill's been a fantastic pick. He'll probably just stay a pretty fantastic pick for most of the tournament unless enough slappies get onto him. But the other thing that's kind of beautiful about Justice Hill is in your runouts when the Ravens don't make it. So like if you're using the Ravens as your secondary stack, like you don't have Lamar, Justice Hill is an even better pick in my opinion because you can be playing it as a Ravens loss. And when the Ravens are playing from behind, like it is Justice Hill's backfield. It ain't Derrick Henry's backfield.
Right. Derrick Henry is not playing.
Derrick Henry rides the pine and he breathes heavily with the anticipation of the Ravens getting a lead that he can salt away in the fourth quarter, right? Like that's what the first couple quarters of the game look like when the Ravens get behind. So Justice Hill is a pretty strong pick there.
I know I already talked about the Vikings, but Aaron Jones looks like phenomenal.
Yeah, no, he's great. The other one that I think is worth talking about is Josh Jacobs, who has higher conference championship probability than Aaron Jones does. The Packers are a little bit stronger there. I think that, in my opinion, my IKB.
So you're talking about 29% versus 23%. So
yes.
To me, that's like the same tier.
Yeah, my IKB is that they're the same. That's what I was going to say, that the Vikings and Packers are kind of the same bet. Even though our math says that the Packers are better, the way I kind of want to IKB it is that they're the same thing. And so the one thing I'm kind of interested in, and I want your opinion on this for Josh Jacobs, is he's been really efficient lately and very touchdown heavy. The other thing that he's doing is he's breaking tackles and forcing missed tackles like there's no tomorrow. Like if Josh Jacobs,
you mean he's playing really, really well?
Well, he is. He's definitely playing well. The thing that's a little frustrating as someone who's had some Josh Jacobs recently and been like, slamming Josh Jacobs in this spot, is when he breaks the tackles or forces the missed tackles, it's very David Montgomery-esque in that not a ton happens afterwards. It's like, dude, this guy just broke 3 tackles on this play. And it's like, and it got him 1 more yard. It's like, shit. So he's not been, and don't take this as like I'm saying that Josh Jacobs has been bad. He's been very good. I'm just a little concerned that it's really coming heavily on the back of touchdowns. Like if you look at his touchdowns over the last few weeks, he's been sun running the touchdowns. And so I'm just a little concerned there. But what are your thoughts on him, specifically in playoff best ball? I'm thinking through like in a Packers loss, how bad could Josh Jacobs be? Like, what does the floor look like there?
Yeah, the floor looks bad. Where they get dominated up front, they don't establish the run, they have to pass a lot. he gets some targets, but he doesn't get going. I mean, to me, the framing is that he's the same tier. He's very similar playoff probability to Aaron Jones in the Vikings. Aaron Jones, his snap rate is like a little bit less, but then let me pull up the let me pull up the expected points as well. So Aaron Jones, his useful snap rate is only 4.4. His expected points per game over the last just last week, I should say. So let me change that to the last 4. So that I can. So his expected points per game is 14.8 versus Josh Jacobs is at 20.8. And so that kind of so we're saying that they're in the same tier, but Josh Jacobs clearly ahead of him in the tier, and then he's priced like around and a bit ahead of him. And I guess putting all that together, when you compare the projections, when you compare the Super Bowl odds, Josh Jacobs should be going. That seems about right, actually.
Yeah, no, he's not terribly mispriced. I think he's going in a pretty.
I think
good
he's
spot.
like, yeah, I think that seems right when I look at like who he's next to. That seems like right.
Yeah, and
Pacheco going ahead of Josh Jacobs doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Oh, really? I mean, the Chiefs have much better.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, Derrick Henry going that far ahead of Josh Jacobs though doesn't make sense. Should probably go Pacheco, Henry, Jacobs. But
my brain went back to the projected points thing.
Yeah.
But
here's I got a fun trivia question for you. How many touchdowns is Josh Jacobs averaging per game over the last 4 weeks?
Last 4 weeks averaging per game. I'm just gonna throw out 2.
Yeah, he's averaging 2 touchdowns a game. He's had 2 3-touchdown games in the last 4 weeks. So he's running pretty hot on touchdowns. Again, he's getting a lot of work. You know, he's got 18 carries, 26 carries, 19 carries.
So he's averaging 1.5 expected touchdowns a game. So his role is incredible.
Yes. And the role is good.
Touchdowns.
He is running a little bit good. And so I'm a little concerned that when it comes to the playoffs,
the floor game is bad.
And they play better teams. Like, I'm a little worried about that. So I'm into Jacobs as a way to get me through some stuff in the first round bye. But the thing that I'm actually really into using Jacobs for is I want to play Jacobs more when I'm playing the Packers to go all the way. Like, when I'm playing it with Love, then I like it a lot better because I'm like, yeah, Jacobs is going to smash because the Packers are winning. He's going to score 2 touchdowns a week. But if I'm just doing a little Jacobs like one-off or a Jacobs plus a receiver skinny stack, and I don't have Love.
You don't like that usage.
I like it less. The other way that I like playing it is if I'm doing like a Chiefs or a Bills thing, and then I just kind of go down the board and I'm hammering Packers and Vikings or something, like 2 of the cheaper NFC teams that are still good and covering a lot of conference championship outcomes.
So let me ask you a practical question here. Josh Jacobs goes a good bit ahead of Jordan Love. So if you take Josh Jacobs, then you have to have Jordan Love almost.
It depends. If you're
it depends on the quarterback you've already gotten.
Yeah, I'm usually pretty aggressive in pushing my quarterbacks in playoff best ball, like my second one.
You just said you can't really do that.
Well, people don't really no one's really going to take your Jordan Love. Like you take Josh Jacobs, like people. It depends on your room. You gotta see if people in there know what's happening or if they're clueless. And the other thing is, like, if I'm playing a team where I don't need a second quarterback, like the Bills, for example. If I'm playing the Bills and I take Josh Jacobs, my proxy for I'm saying like this is a scenario where the Packers make a deep run and that's why Jacobs is good because the Packers are winning games. My proxy for, instead of taking Jordan Love here because I don't need him because I have Josh Allen, I'm just going to take more Packers receivers. And so that way I'm compounding my bet with Jacobs so that when the Packers win and when Josh Jacobs scores lots of points, hopefully one of these receivers is also having a good game as well. And that means in the next round, I've advanced more total players on my team. My team has more live roster spots and it's going to be doing better. And so basically what I'm saying is a one-off Josh Jacobs with no receivers is probably pretty bad.
Right. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of the way to frame it.
Right. It's you want to play it as a Packers deep run, but Jordan Love isn't the only way to play that.
Yeah, very, very well put.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's time to move on to receivers here.
Yeah, let's we can do a quick tight end pit stop here because
sorry. Yeah, I forgot we do tight ends first.
These are going to be fast though. I can literally like rapid fire through them and get your insights here. We talked about Grant Calcaterra last week. Dallas Goedert's officially on IR now. Calcaterra is out there for all the snaps. He's a fantastic last round playoff best ball pick for anything where the Eagles are going to the Super Bowl. Don't like him as much if you don't have an Eagles Super Bowl on that team. But even if it's like an AFC team quarterback, like you have Josh Allen, you have Pat Mahomes, and you got Eagles stuff as a secondary, I still don't mind that Grant Calcaterra scoring a touchdown in the Super Bowl. That's basically what you're betting on. So he's an awesome last round pick.
So is Dallas Goedert just done then?
I don't know. He's on IR, so he's gone for 4 weeks minimum. Haven't seen for sure what's going to happen there. There are some teams where we have Dallas Goedert ranked still. We just don't know. And so you could kind of even treat Dallas Goedert as like a bye week player, right? Like he's not going to help you in round one, but he could be, you get Dallas Goedert back in the Super Bowl and he scores a touchdown. Like that's pretty awesome. So he's one where we've moved him down in our rankings due to the uncertainty, but we're just going to need to watch that injury situation and get an updated timeline before we know really how to handle that.
Right.
But for now,
because that's what strikes me is, okay, you're playing Calcaterra because the Eagles are under the Super Bowl. That's like what, end of January, early February. There has to be a decent probability that Dallas Goedert is back by then.
There definitely is. So it's not to say that like you draft only Calcaterra, no Goedert anymore. Like we still have Goedert ahead of Calcaterra in our rankings. So, but it's just that there's now if prior to Dallas Goedert going on IR, the probability that Calcaterra was a good pick that was going to hit your lineup in the Super Bowl was maybe like just 5%, and now it is much higher, right? Like you've got all.
And he's rarely drafted, right?
The Slappies draft him now. Like people are aware. He was one of Davis has Calcaterra as one of his favorite players. Davis is big into Calcaterra now.
That's a bad sign.
Rightfully so. It's a good pick. But yes, there's a horde of Slappies that are descending on Grant Calcaterra.
Imagine taking Grant Calcaterra over Brock Bowers. I'm joking, obviously.
Oh man.
Jesus Christ, JSN is 59.1.
Yeah, Seahawks. You shouldn't draft Seahawks yet. It's like by Thursday, you'll probably know if you can draft Seahawks. You get a Rams loss. You get a Rams loss, and you better believe your buppy that I'm going to have a lot of JSN. Thursday night after the game's over. So the other one I had a question on was Zach Ertz. what do you think if I'm doing the Jaden Daniels thing, right? Lots of times people will do this little Commanders 3-piece. You go Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Brian Robinson to help advance a bye week team through, right? They're pretty Commanders are low probability to make conference championship, but you get 3 pretty high value fantasy pieces for where they're priced at, and you can get them all together. It's a nice correlated bet. What do you think about Zach Ertz? Because after you run out of Brian Robinson and Terry McLaurin, you're kind of like out of Commanders pieces. Do you think Zach Ertz is at all viable to tack on there?
So here's my thought. What we're saying here is that you take the consideration is, do you take Zach Ertz for his round 1 points? And it strikes me that Zach Ertz is still going to have a low projection in half PPR. And if round 1 points are like the most plentiful available, then that he doesn't seem to quite fit the profile for me to be attractive as a round 1 get your points guy.
Yeah, the more I think through it, because what you run into is you're stuck where there's no more good players that you can take and remain in structure and not draft more than 4 total NFL teams and then inherently guarantee a dead roster spot by the conference championship, right? And very likely earlier. But if we're talking about like a team like the Commanders, who are very likely dead by the conference championship anyway, if instead of taking Zach Ertz, who might project a lot worse, like what if I do just pivot and do and JSN is my random one-off player. He's my fifth team. And yes, I guarantee that I can't have 10 players in the conference championship, but he'll project a lot better than Zach Ertz. And like, there's also no guarantee Ertz is going to the conference championship anyway. I think on those teams with really heavy bye weeks, this is the only time I'm doing it. And I did write about this in my article that's published on Legendary Upside, the playoff best ball, sacrilegious approach to playoff best ball. I do think that those are the circumstances where you've got 5 bye week players. So round 1 is really thin for you, where you can kind of break structure. And it's really like, you can kind of use Zach Ertz as like your canary in the coal mine, where you're like, all right, I took Jaden Daniels, I took Terry McLaurin, I took Brian Robinson, I got, maybe I took like a one-off Aaron Jones, or not one-off Aaron Jones, because that'd be your other NFC team. Or sure, let's just say I have a one-off Aaron Jones from earlier, and I'm playing an AFC team to the Super Bowl. I've got like a bunch of Chiefs or whatever. I got a Chiefs mega stack. If you're sitting there and you're like, oh gosh, do I really take Zach Ertz here to stay in structure? Or do I take this juicy JSN or this juicy Mike Evans here instead? That's the canary in the coal mine. Like when you're like, should I take Zach Ertz or should I take Mike Evans? Like that's how you know it's okay. This is when you break structure. So I try really hard not to break structure as much as possible, even on those 5 bye week player teams, because when the stuff does break right for you, when you do get Washington upsetting whoever they play in round 1, say they upset the Eagles and they go to round 2, and all of a sudden you just got a 4-player stack through to round 2, and you're getting all those potential points again. Like it's such an enormous advantage on the field, and the historical data bears that out too, that I want to lean into it because crazy shit happens. Like it's so who would have said that last season the outcome that you needed was you really needed to play Jake Ferguson. You needed the one-off Jake Ferguson really bad in round 1, but you shouldn't really draft any other Cowboys. You just wanted Jake Ferguson to get you through. And like, yeah, Zach Ertz and Jake Ferguson are different players, but it's like, dude, you can definitely, there's an outcome where the Commanders get the upset, Ertz catches a touchdown and gets like 40, 50 yards in round 1. And that, 10, 11 points is really all that you need to sneak a team through. Ertz isn't the one that's carrying you. Ertz is just the one that's like plugging the hole to make sure that hey, all the rest of these guys, they went off enough to get me through. And Ertz is just here to advance a team that otherwise wouldn't have advanced without just this little floor performance. So that was me kind of making both sides of the argument. But I do think
I'm just looking at the Fantasy Pros projections, and I think this is standard. And so if I change it to half PPR, that might make more sense to reference. So his projection is 7.9 for this week. I don't know. I guess that's not like terrible.
Right. And that's really what I'm saying. Like the argument for Zach Ertz is like, you don't need a lot and it can be okay. And if you're already making the correlated team bet, like you might as well lean into it. But also,
but it's also bad if the Commanders don't get true, having the Zach Ertz thing seems bad.
It seems pretty bad, right? So yeah, you could certainly make the argument to me, and I wouldn't say that it was bad to do a one-off in the instance.
But it's only because in your given structure that you're playing for some probability that the Commanders do make the conference championship, which is apparently 14% right now.
And you can kind of think of this as like by taking a one-off player in round one, like a fifth team, which inherently guarantees that you cannot have 10 live players in the conference championship round, which would be the nut outcome. By doing that and taking that one-off player, you're lowering your ceiling outcome of 10 live players in the conference championship, but you're raising your floor outcome. And it's really what you're trading is you're trading your additional player in round three, and you're saying, hey, it's okay that I'm doing this because as soon as round two happens, I get 5 guaranteed. I have 5 players that are 100% to advance to round two because I have 5 bye week players, right? I have 5 guys who will be scoring points in round two. And so that's kind of the way to frame it. But I thought it was an interesting spot just because I've been in situations where Zach Ertz kind of looks like an okay pick, but I'm debating. All right.
Right.
Okay. I got one for you.
Okay.
Pretend you're drafting a Detroit and Kansas City Super Bowl team. Right now, I won't offer any more clarity than that, but you have pieces from Detroit. You have pieces from Kansas City.
And you're trying to figure out how you filled out your week one lineup.
Well, no. I want to know which tight end do you prefer because they go basically back to back. Let's say you're on the clock. You can only take one. Sam LaPorta or Travis Kelce?
It's Kelce.
Yeah. I agree. If you're playing for the KC outcome, then like KC is in the Super Bowl here, then it's just Kelce.
KC they don't get to the Super Bowl unless they get Travis Kelce going. Like Detroit get to the Super Bowl so easily without getting LaPorta going.
Yeah. What do you think about like if I have Goff as my quarterback, so I'm not guaranteeing. I agree with you. Like if I have Mahomes, it's Travis Kelce, But if I have Goff, I think there's an argument to be made for LaPorta because you still could play the Super Bowl as Lions-Bills and have it be a very similar probability as Chiefs, right? And then say like it's okay that I didn't take.
But you're already heavy invested into the Chiefs.
By the point at which you're deciding this, you're not so heavy invested. Your Jared Goff is your second round pick most likely.
Okay.
Your first round pick is probably Amon-Ra or one of the running backs.
Okay, so you haven't even decided to do KC yet.
Yeah, and then your third pick is going to be like Kelce or LaPorta. Maybe you did. Yeah, maybe it's the fourth round pick. You just made it through the turn. And that's really where this decision would probably come into play is you get something like, David Montgomery, Jared Goff, and then your third round pick is maybe you get a Jameson Williams, and now you're staring down Kelce or LaPorta. So that's kind of the spot.
So you've got your Detroit stack. I think you just build on it with LaPorta.
Yeah. So it sounds
given that context, which is the most likely context for people drafting.
I think that we both are in agreement, though, that we like the Kelce fantasy points more than we like the LaPorta fantasy points. And if you're in a situation where both are equal, pretend your only Super Bowl outcome you're playing for is Detroit KC, then we would both say that it's Kelce, right?
Right.
Okay.
But that's going to be a rare scenario, it sounds like.
No, there's definitely, I mean, because there's spots where you might be your secondary AFC team. Say you've got Lions and you do Chiefs as your primary AFC team with the Lions with Jared Goff. Your secondary AFC team could easily be something like the Steelers, where you're like, sure, they've got Super Bowl odds, but I don't believe that they're making the Super Bowl, and I don't really want to play for like a Steelers-Lions Super Bowl. So I'm just using them as advance rate pieces. So anyway, I keep coming into that spot, and I thought it was interesting and wanted to get your opinion on it, but I think we're lockstep on how we view it, though.
Yep. And so I don't think there's any point talking about the backups here.
Yeah, let's hit wide receiver.
So wide receiver, and I remember you had some notes about
receiver. To pivot away from playoff best ball for a second. I think we just need to talk about Ja'Marr Chase, because this season is not the Saquon Barkley season. This is the Ja'Marr Chase season, everybody. I mean, if you look at how, like, this guy absolutely smoked every other receiver in fantasy points per game, just absolutely crushed them. And he had a higher advance rate than Saquon Barkley, too. And some people might say, oh, well, it was only a little bit, like they're basically the same. Ja'Marr Chase did it from the first round, where Saquon Barkley did it from the 2-3 turn. Like, those are not the same. Having that high of an advance rate from the first round is absolutely absurd. And one of the things that I'm realizing when you look through a lot of these high advance rate guys, number one, there is a lot of the correlation of players that are drafted together, players that were drafted commonly with these high advance rate players get their advance rates pulled up, which is actually the topic of my Dateable project that I did last year, where I came up with a metric called roster agnostic advance rate that used the nearest neighbor algorithm to extricate the advance rates from each other and basically look at, hey, if these players were just on, any old roster, not just the rosters they were drafted on, but if you replaced players on every roster and said they were equally likely to be drafted on any given roster, what would their advance rate look like? I'm fairly confident that a lot of these highest advance rate players this year are being pulled up because of the people that they were paired with. But also there is one thing in common with them too, and it's that they were some of the largest spike week having players. Like Ja'Marr Chase had some of the largest spike weeks all season, and he also performed very well, so it makes sense. But some of the ones I'm thinking of that went later, like Jerry Jeudy, is one of the highest advance rate players this season, and he did nothing for you for the majority of the season. And then he had a couple good weeks, and then he had an incredible week. But that incredible week means every single team that had Jerry Jeudy that week used him, and they got a big boost from him, right? And so it's really that. Also, I do think that if you were I would be pretty confident that teams that drafted Jerry Jeudy were much more likely to have heavy running backs early, because you're forced into these later wide receivers that are kind of outside of the typical wide receiver window. So I do think you have a lot of that going on, where Jerry Jeudy's roster agnostic advance rate probably, I would say, falls a decent bit just because of the correlation of being drafted with Saquon Barkley. And also the place on the board where Jerry Jeudy went for much of the summer was the same side of the board as Saquon Barkley, as Ja'Marr Chase. So you get a lot of that anchoring effect there. Anyway, long and short way to say that Ja'Marr Chase, I think, is probably the one who would have the roster agnostic advance rate closest to his actual advance rate, because he was just an absolute freak. Saquon Barkley will likely have a higher roster agnostic advance rate than his actual advance rate, because there are a lot of really poorly constructed Saquon teams that somehow miraculously did not advance even after, what's likely going to be the single season rushing record being posted. Right. All right. I think we can move on from Chase. I just needed to give him his flowers here.
Yeah, no, makes sense for sure. We put him on the cover page, I think.
I've got a question for you here. George Pickens has a grade 2 hamstring strain. I think his status is in doubt for this next week. Are we going to see George Pickens in the fantasy playoffs? Not playoff basketball, but fantasy playoffs.
No.
Wow.
I don't think so. I mean, anything's possible. Anything's possible. But you remember how many games that Nico Collins missed?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
A grade 2 hamstring strain is no joke.
So
and they just found it out. Like, why wouldn't they put it? Maybe they won't put him on IR because it's too close to the end of the year. But like that's a pretty lengthy recovery time. By lengthy, I mean a month.
Yeah. Follow-up question then: are you concerned about him for playoff best ball then?
You have to be a little bit concerned. I mean, I think so. We just had week 14. He missed. They just realized that it's a grade 2 because it just happened on Thursday. So this Thursday will be will be 1 week from the injury, and so week 15, 16, 17, 18. I mean, so 4 weeks takes us through week 18. Or to the end of week 18, so he could technically play that Sunday. Week five and on would be the wild card round. I mean, it's not 100% probably. His playing probability in the wild card is probably like 80%, probably a little bit higher.
Yeah, I would assume it's higher just because if they do hold him out that long, if he
you can't hold him out from the playoffs.
Right. The Steelers, he's not going to let him. He's just going to get on the field.
But it's the playoffs. You got to play. You got to play because what are you leaving something in the tank for?
Right.
But it may be at lower effectiveness. It may be at greater re-injury risk. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I do think he's still a pretty good playoff basketball pick just because he's pretty cheap, but I'm trying to find a way. I mean, really what the answer to my question is, because what I'm thinking through is like, I'm just going to have a lot of Steelers if I keep, if I'm drafting right now, the Steelers are really well priced. They really help me get bye week teams through. Like they have high conference championship probability. They're a pretty easy team to know who to draft. Like it's George Pickens and Najee are really the ones that I'm drafting. I'm not doing much else. Sometimes I'll do Warren. But I think the thing that I want to insulate myself from is I really don't want my whole portfolio to live and die by the Steelers, even if they are great values. And the way that you do that is simply by waiting. Wait to draft a little bit. Because instead of having to pay for the Steelers in round 5, maybe you make some stronger Super Bowl type bets, stronger bets building out your primary teams. And then in the late rounds, you then get to do like a Seahawks thing, or you get to do, whoever, or you get to do.
I mean, the Vikings are the same price almost.
Right. Yeah.
And they're a little bit lower.
Sometimes it just doesn't mesh. They do go a little bit before them typically, like just
right. It's a little bit, and then maybe you've already built out 2 AFC teams by that, or no NFC teams by that point.
Exactly.
So they're not a true complement. Opposite.
Yeah. The other annoying thing about the Vikings is Jordan Addison gets drafted aggressively now, and he was free. Prior to this last week, I would leave Jordan Addison until my 10th round pick and have, Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson, Sam Darnold, and my 10th round pick Jordan Addison.
No worries. He's gonna flatline this week and then he'll be free again.
Yeah. But this is not the week for cheap Jordan Addison, let me tell you. There's people just one-off Jordan Addison in the 6th round and stuff now. So anyway.
That isn't fun.
Okay. I got one for you. This is kind of keeping the theme with George Pickens, but Ladd McConkey, he's very clear. He is the Chargers wide receiver. Like, he's not even the Chargers wide receiver. He's the Chargers offense at this point. Like, they're down bad in the running game with no J.K. Dobbins. Quentin Johnston, like, his hands have turned back into stone. He had a very brief period where he was actually catching things. It looks so bad for the Chargers without Ladd McConkey. The whole plane is Ladd McConkey. And I'm here to tell you to buy the fucking dip on Ladd McConkey in playoff best ball. His injury has kept people off of him. I think I got a 10th round Ladd McConkey share today. And previously he was going like 7th, sometimes even 6th round. And it's just like such a clean little one-off, such a clean skinny stack. If you need quarterback help for round 1, just do Ladd McConkey, Justin Herbert. I mean, do you think I'm crazy, Drico, or is Ladd McConkey a generational wealth opportunity for playoff best ball?
I think he's good. So I'm looking at the week-to-week numbers here. I do notice some, like, it's one of those charts. And so you have the weeks where he is the offense, and then you have the weeks where they'll hardly throw him the ball. He's the offense again. His last game, which was in week 13, so last week, he had a 48% target spread run. The week before that, it was 14%. The week before that, it was 27%. Then it was 9%. And so I think you average it all out, and I'm gonna be good and include the 48% in the 4-week average. You get 25%, which is really good. And even if you do 6 weeks, you still get to 23%. So he's like a heavily targeted and key cog in their offense. I think that's indisputable. What I did look at his price, but I don't quite remember. What's his? Where does he go?
Ladd,
42.
He slides a bunch.
So he goes around Keon Coleman, Terry McLaurin, Rashad Bateman, Tim Patrick, and so very, very, very cheap. Very, very cheap. He
sometimes undrafted right now, you know.
So he'll slide. That's his ADP, but some aggressive. You're the one single-handedly keeping it up at 42.5. I'm joking. And then you have a 15% conference championship probability. So, I mean, let me. I know you're talking about AFC. I'm talking about AFC versus NFC. But Seahawks, even with only a 68% chance to make the playoffs, they have a 17% conference championship. They are a higher conference championship probability than the Chargers, according to this. And then JSN is like multiple rounds cheaper than Ladd McConkey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you here that the Seahawks are going to be a really, really good pick. For me, it's basically just wait until Thursday night. Like, they won't get that much more expensive. Like, just wait till Thursday, because if the Rams lose, the Seahawks playoff odds shoot up, right? Like, that's the biggest threat to them right now is the Rams. And so you get that information and you can hammer it. One thing I will say is the Seahawks power ranking is pretty strong right now. Like, they're coming in hot. If you were gonna ask,
right, I figured that's why they had the strong conference championship.
If you were gonna ask me which input into the Sims I'm the least confident in, it's the Seahawks relative power ranking to other teams. So let me just give you kind of like, I'm going to ask you a couple teams, and this is purely like a real life football. Which team is more likely to win the game on a neutral field? Steelers or Seahawks?
I mean, my gut says Steelers.
And how close would you say it is?
Based on results, I'd say pretty pretty close. I mean, when you look at the numbers, when you look at like who they played, who they've beaten, like didn't they just fucking wipe the floor with the Cardinals?
Yeah,
like they obliterated them.
And
the Cardinals are a good team.
Yeah, that's what's really doing it is their strength of victory was tremendous. Like, I mean, it was a shit kicking. Like, it was not pretty, you know? And so that's what did a lot of the heavy lifting here to really rocket the Seahawks.
They beat the 49ers.
So here's another one. Seahawks or Vikings?
That feels close.
So we have the Seahawks ahead of the Vikings by about as much as we have the Seahawks behind the Eagles. Does that kind of jive? Or
so say that again?
We have the Seahawks as stronger than the Vikings by about the same amount that we have the Eagles stronger than the Seahawks.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right.
The Seahawks just feel like a touch hot to me right now. So that's my, you know, and again, like, I think our outputs for this are pretty much bang on in line with a lot of the market. So like if you looked at ESPN's playoff probabilities, if you looked at anywhere that's doing playoff probabilities, we're not off on most of these things, and we're using different inputs than them. So that always feels good when you can have a slightly different process and get to similar results as places that you think are probably doing a pretty good job. So I feel mostly good about it, but the one that I think is the most fragile is the Seahawks, how strong we have them as a team.
Yeah. I'm just looking at alternative ELOs, and they have the Seahawks as good, but just below the Packers, just below the Texans.
Oh, yeah. The Texans are not in the same universe in our stuff. The Texans are like worse than the Bengals in our stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Worse than the Broncos.
Well, they have the Texans as they have they have them. This isn't sorted properly. God damn it.
I was like, wow, that's a big deviation.
So they have them right next to the Chargers and Broncos. Yeah,
Chargers and Broncos and Texans are all basically the same. Chargers, Bengals, Broncos, Texans, all.
Yeah. They have them in that tier with the Texans, just ahead of the Texans, just ahead of the Bucks, just behind the Chargers, just behind the Broncos.
Yeah, Steelers and Seahawks.
That feels more right.
Steelers and Seahawks are like a little mini tier for us, and you could say that the Chiefs are kind of like the bottom of that tier too. The Chiefs are lower than the Seahawks, though, which, like, based on what we've seen from the Chiefs, kind of feels not that unreasonable. And then the Vikings and Chiefs are pretty close as well. So
like I think you're right that the Seahawks are coming out too hot.
They're just a little like a touch. I don't think it's by a lot, so it's not like, in my opinion, it's not screwing up the output by a ton. But if you
what do we have them or you have them 17? They should probably be at a 14% conference championship.
Yeah, I'd say 14, 15 probably.
Then that jumps to like 20-ish with a Rams loss.
Yeah, I think 15 is probably about right. So we're just a touch, like a shade hot on the Seahawks, but that is something that I try to keep an eye on to see that if we have.
But I still like that. That still makes me believe that they're the same. They're basically the same tier as the Chargers, unless you're under you're low on the Chargers.
The only reason that I am saying that I'm holding off on Seahawks as opposed to Chargers right now is Chargers are 89% to make the playoffs, and Seahawks. There's a very binary thing about to happen on Thursday night. The Rams win or the Rams lose. Rams win,
and the price won't efficiently.
Price won't move, right? So the Rams win, and all of a sudden the Seahawks playoff odds go down. Rams lose, and all of a sudden the Seahawks playoff odds skyrocket. And so that's the thing that I'm really waiting on. And when if the Rams do lose, then all of a sudden Seattle's probably my favorite click. I just like hammer it until
right.
The scary thing though is like, do you take Kenneth Walker? Do you take Zach Charbonnet? Like the thing that I really dislike is when there's a team where I can't get both skill positions. I can't get running back and wide receiver for them, because you do really want to consolidate your bets onto just a couple teams in playoff basketball. So having a team where it's like, oh, this team is only for if you need wide receiver help or only if you need running back help does feel a little bad. But that is it's
right.
Worth thinking through.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're already right now you're already taking additional risks that they don't make the playoffs.
Right.
Which may vanquish on Thursday. But you can't compound it with running back playing risk.
Yeah, that's pretty spooky to me. All right, let's
move on to the next chart.
Yeah, I was just looking if there were any more notes that I had. Yeah, let's next chart here. So man, I mean, we talked a little bit about the Bucs, but Mike Evans seems like a super strong playoff basketball pick to me right now. The Bucs are kind of through that threshold where they feel safe enough that I'm willing to draft them here. I don't really think there's
the note that screams to me. So Nico, obviously insane pick, and really excited to get him true in the basketball playoffs, but awful pick in playoff basketball.
He's just too expensive. He's
22.3. When you're comparing them, like you just said their ELO is similar. Like actually, you said it's less than the Bengals.
Yeah, they are, I believe, 1 or 5 ELO points lower than the Bengals here. So yeah,
they have a 16% conference championship versus 14 for the Commanders.
Yeah, I mean Mike Evans. Like, if you're telling me that I can get Mike Evans for free in the last round, or I have to pay a premium, my opportunity cost for taking Nico Collins is I miss out on like a premium piece from a Super Bowl team that I'm building. I'm missing out on Travis Kelce to take.
You're missing out, yeah, or Justin Jefferson.
Who actually, like, Justin Jefferson, his team, has a 23% conference championship probability. Houston's down at 16%. But we just said, like, we think Minnesota, our IKB would be that Minnesota might even be closer to that log jam of that 30% cluster, right? And the one thing I will say about Houston,
and the Vikings have a 4%. It's low, but a 4% 1 seed probability,
right?
Like, that would be insane.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about Houston is I am interested to see how they look coming out of the bye. I do think that teams like Houston and Baltimore with this bye might come out in a really good situation for the playoffs, where they got rest at the right time. They were able to self-scout and evaluate what they're doing and get right for the playoffs, at the right time. And I could certainly see Houston leaning more into like a pass-first approach. We've seen them be doing that now that Nico is back. They've been less run-heavy. They've been running less on first down, which is a big relief for anyone who's rooting for Houston to do well. And so anyway, I want to keep all these things in, because when you're doing modeling stuff like this, like, you've got all of your inputs, but there's just some things that are really hard to capture in the inputs. And so by remaining plugged in and like understanding the context of these teams, like, hey, Baltimore and Houston just had the bye. Like, Baltimore's got some guys that are coming back from injury and they could be getting healthy. Houston has kind of like shifted their identity a little bit since Nico has come back and been healthy. And like, so you get all these factors that are really hard to capture in a model, where I do just want to kind of hold them in my head and understand like where the fragility is on each of these things. And so I think Houston could surprise us to the positive. I think Baltimore could surprise us to the positive. I think the Vikings could surprise us to the positive. We're probably a little hot on Seattle, so those are the things that I'm just trying to like keep in my head and keep in mind And so I think that having context like that is pretty important as you're thinking through this stuff and like trying to understand the range of outcomes and how things can break for you. So it is an interesting spot, but I mean, certainly the Ravens and the Texans are overpriced in playoff best ball right now, which does make it very hard to want to IKB that type of stuff, right? And say like,
right.
Well, I think
the market is IKBing it.
It's IKBing it too hard, right? It's like there's meat on the bone. There's some upside to have here that's hard to
but
capture.
I think it's one thing to IKB and it's contrarian. But then IKB and it's consensus is like a double whammy.
Yeah. IKB
like, IKB contrarian, you get paid off if you're right. Whereas IKB consensus just means you've just met the baseline for your extra price.
It would be like this last week if instead of Zach Charbonnet being the largest chalk running back, it was Braylon Allen is the biggest chalk running back, and everyone knew that the projection was favoring Charbonnet. It's like, yeah, Charbonnet projects for 2 more points than Braylon Allen or 3 more points than Braylon Allen, and Braylon Allen's coming in with 50% owned and Charbonnet's coming in 10% owned, and you're like, I'm slamming Braylon Allen, baby. Like,
right.
It's just
I think these projections are wrong.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, you can and you should, like where you can identify fragility and have like either you've got alternate inputs that you're using or you have, a reasonable, logical argument for why something might be different than what a model output is telling you. Like, it's okay to lean into that as long as you're confident in either your inputs to what you're doing or you have, a logical reason behind that. It's okay to lean into that. When it really becomes less okay is, like you said, the market's already doing that for you and they're doing it too aggressively. So
right. You can not IKB and be a contrarian is even better.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to a couple other quick notes here.
Yeah.
Touch on the 49ers, guys. So you get the Deebo squeaky wheel stuff happening on Twitter. Deebo says he's not struggling. He's just not getting the ball. Met with a community note on Twitter that said he's leading the team in drops. He is actually struggling. George Kittle came out.
NFL player getting community noted is all-timer.
It was rough. George Kittle did come out in defense of his boy and said he expected a big game from Deebo this Thursday. I mean, it does seem like an all-time squeaky wheel spot. The other one I'm interested in is Juwan Jennings, who looks more and more like the best wide receiver on the 49ers right now. So I'm interested in your thoughts on these 49ers receivers. How is it going to play out for the rest of the season? And also, what do you expect?
Can I just talk my bags and say it's just George Kittle? Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
No, that is purely bag talking. That's what I want. So if we're looking at Deebo, he had a rough game of only 2 targets. He's had a couple of rough games. But he's had some solid games too. So he had, let me see. Where do I get yards? He had a 100-yard game in week 6, 71-yard game in week 8, 62-yard game week 10, 110-yard game week 2. Clearly a down year, but still there is still some upside there. It kind of is frustrating that that he hasn't been able to get going, just because the talent has been so strong. I guess my question is, how much credence do we put on like the overweight thing? Feels like an explanation of a downtrend. Like, are there actual signs other than like per stats? Is there signs that he's overweight? Like, has that been an NFL media speculation thing, or is that just us saying, "Oh, he's playing bad, he must be fat"?
I don't think there's anything to that. I don't know, man. I tend to just kind of block that out. Sweaty basement dwelling virgins calling elite 0.001% athlete fat. Just I tend to block that out as noise.
Deebo is like you just said, like obviously elite because he plays in the NFL. He's one of the best NFL players, but he's also has been an elite NFL player,
right?
And he like if you're talking about single week stuff, does feel pretty strong.
Yeah, I'm interested in him. I don't know for Showdown this week how much ownership he'll be garnering, if people will really buy into the squeaky wheel stuff, or if they'll just be slaves to the game log and not really want to play him. I mean, I think a lot of it can probably be explained by the guy was hurt early, and he also had a really bad case of pneumonia that landed him in the hospital. That seems like enough to, have you ever had pneumonia so bad that you were in the hospital?
Never.
Your lung function's not great for a little bit afterwards. You had a lot of damage to your lungs.
Right.
And you do actually use I know that might be a foreign concept to many of the people that are out there calling Deebo Samuel fat, but to those of you that haven't experienced cardio in the last couple decades, you do use your lungs when you're running around on a football field. Those are important.
Right. Those are important.
Being able to oxygenate your blood matters when
especially in the cold.
Yeah. Just in athletics, you do actually need to oxygenate your blood. So shocking news, I know, to a lot of couch locked people out there calling Deebo Samuel fat. I have no patience for anyone calling an NFL player fat unless it is Eddie Lacy and he's literally posting pictures of him shithousing 5-pound bags of gummy bears and showing pictures of him crushing Chinese takeout for a family of 4. When there is verifiable proof and the player themselves is telling you oh yeah, I gained a lot of weight this year. In fact, the coach told me I needed to lose 30 pounds coming in. Then you're allowed to call the guy. When the guy himself has told you he's fat, then it's okay. When you're just Deebo Samuel didn't score enough fantasy points for my team, I don't think that you can call the guy fat.
You right, and saying I don't think anybody who said he's fat. People have said he's too overweight for an NFL athlete, but. It does strike me as a post fact after the event explanation rather than we have some evidence of this and therefore it's not an evidence based thing and we've seen people are just explaining something after the fact.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's see if there were any other notes I had on this wide receiver chart. We got a Tyreek Hill game. He did Tyreek Hill stuff. What do you know? He wasn't dead. I certainly think that the wrist injury probably was hampering him and probably is still hampering him. But, he's still Tyreek Hill. He still went out there and crushed. So, nice to see. Probably not I guess there could be a little actionable info takeaway from this. If you're in FFPC sprint and you've got Tyreek Hill, he's definitely on the menu to play if you were in a circumstance where you could have him on your bench. But I would assume that most people just were in a spot where they had to be starting him anyway. Right.
And I think, I think you have Tyreek Hill, you're playing him. So you're right. I guess the only other consideration would be single week. I still have the sense that he might have aged just a little bit, where he's gone from fastest player in the NFL, nobody can cover this guy, to just really good. But you probably don't want to play into really good the week after he had the really good game.
Yeah.
But it good to see the sign of life.
Yeah, definitely. All right, last one on this chart. Khalil Shakir. I mean, all last season. I mean, it's been multiple seasons that I've been pounding the table for Khalil Shakir as one of the better receivers for the Bills. I mean, way back when they had Steph Diggs and Gabe Davis still, I was pretty firmly of the opinion that Khalil Shakir was their second best receiver behind Diggs. He's looked very good. He's flashed in the past, but now that they've had Kincaid injured, Keon Coleman's out, Amari Cooper still is just like very slowly being worked in. He's not running a full complement of routes yet.
So the last 4 weeks, his underlying metrics have been like fantastic. So, I'm including the most recent week 14. He's had an average route run of 84%. I'm now excluding the week 14, so just week 10 through 13. He had an average target per run of 33%. He had 41% in week 13. So I'm feeling actually a little, and I guess we didn't really cover single week stuff. We were just talking about playoff basketball, and so I guess even more we should have covered them. What I'm saying is that the underlying metrics before this breakout were there, and the blow up game has legs. There's sustainability here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm buying into it. I put in the notes like, is Khalil Shakir the very clear number one pass catcher on Buffalo? I think the answer is yes.
The Bills think so.
Yeah, the Bills think so too.
Josh Allen's been playing like it.
Yeah, so I'm pretty into Khalil Shakir. I think he's a pretty important piece for Buffalo playoff basketball teams. He would be my money for the pass catcher to lead the team in points at the Super Bowl. So, yeah, agree there. And where is he going? Shakir, he goes like the Bills pass catchers can sometimes just go undrafted. Like literally all of them can just make it to the last round. It's really, for whatever reason, people don't take them without Josh Allen in some rooms. There are other rooms that are much more sane where they'll take them. But Khalil Shakir is like a fourth rounder, sometimes fifth, sometimes sixth, and you can even get him in the seventh if you're in a room where people just are allergic to the Bills. So he's got a pretty wide standard deviation. Most players do. Right.
So if the guy with Josh Allen wants him, he takes him early. He goes. But if they don't want him, then he can be pretty cheap.
Yeah.
If you have Josh Allen, then you should push Shakir and then lock in his.
Yeah, I'll push if there's ever like a good option on a different team that I really like is like either they're a strong player without a bye and decent conference championship odds, or one of the bye teams that's a strong player for them. I'll probably prioritize that over Shakir. But if there's nothing better, then Shakir's a pretty solid player to take when you have a Josh Allen team.
Yeah, agree. Should we move on to this next?
Let's do it. Let's bring it home. I think we can do it in under 2 hours, Drico. We got 2 minutes left. You want to try and rapid fire it?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Right. I mean, these are last round playoff basketball guys. So
yeah, I got two questions for you. Okay, we got less than a minute on each. How big a difference is there between Jayden Reed, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Dontavion Wicks for purposes of playoff basketball?
You almost have to treat them interchangeably.
The only one I would say is different is Dontavion Wicks.
Yeah, you're right. He's the back.
Those first three, and I for me, I think it's Jayden Reed is like one tick above Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. I know that he's had this last game a lot of. I know a goose egg hurts, and people are like, what the hell? He's not even on the field. They ran so much two tight end stuff, and they really, really were valuing the additional pass protection, additional blockers for the run game. So Jayden Reed was just not on there a ton. They also didn't have a ton of offensive plays. So it was these two factors that contributed to making it really difficult and stifling Jayden Reed's production. And it was hey, they didn't have him on the field a bunch because that just wasn't the game plan here. They were going a different way. They wanted the heavy set in. And then also they didn't run a ton of plays. So you had those two things kind of marrying, and it created this perfect storm for him to goose egg. All right, 30 seconds. Can you draft any other Broncos receivers other than Courtland Sutton? Are you taking Devon Bailey?
I need. Let me look at the data, please. So Valet, I'm showing as 8.5 points a game. Troy Franklin 5.6. So we're talking about playoff basketball here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can. Like, that just seems like such a specific bet to make, where you're betting Broncos deep playoff run, and so when the field thins out, like Devon Valet, his 8.5 points is bringing home the bacon. Yeah. I don't think that's right. I think it is just Sutton.
I agree. It's just Sutton. I've taken Marvin Mims once, but after I did it, I was like, I think that's the only time I need to do that. So
right.
All right. I think that'll do it for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope that you advanced more teams than you expected earlier in the season. It certainly got a little better as things went on. But now the real fun begins as we sweat through the playoffs. So we will look forward to seeing you back here next week as we either celebrate or bemoan our fortunes from the first week of the fantasy playoffs.
See you next week, everyone.